a meeting, but something that meets the shared ambitions of humanity. Thank you very much.
Merci, Votre Excellence.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
It is my pleasure now to welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Rohi John, Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Natural Resources of the Gambia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Adama Barrow, President of the Republic of the Gambia, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency President of the Republic of Azerbaijan for the successful hosting of COP29 and also the warm welcome. It is an honor to address this crucial forum of this COP29 on behalf of the Gambia, a nation that, like many climate-vulnerable, least developed countries, is facing the harsh and escalating impact of climate change. The 1.5 degrees Celsius limit of the Paris Agreement becomes ever more critical as many climate-vulnerable countries have already warmed to mean temperatures, affecting the optimal growth of our economy. The Gambia stands on the front line of this global crisis, committed to making significant strides in our action towards the climate change, as indicated in our NDCs. However, we are constrained by the lack of adequate climate finance, just like many other least developed countries. It is imperative that developed nations fulfill their existing climate finance commitments. The new collective quantified goals represent a pivotal opportunity to correct past shortcomings of the $100 billion climate targets. We therefore call for COP29 to agree on a core science-based public climate finance goal that reflects our evolving needs and priorities. The NCQG must be ambitious, trackable, and actionable, with a focus on funding that enhances resilience and drives transformative change in line with the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree temperature reduction targets. The NCQG must directly connect with ongoing reforms to facilitate effective resource mobilizations, enhance accountability in the international financial system, and address cost of capital, debt instability, and loss and damage comprehensively. Specifically, to incentivize low cost capital to the NCQG must stipulate the financial accounting towards the goal must be differentiated based on its cost, such as on the grant equivalent basis, avoiding the 100 million target floor as counting all loans and grants equally. Let me stress here that loss and damage must become an integral part of the climate finance conversation. Building social safety net is critical to reach the most vulnerable population, with dedicated resources to help countries recover from irreversible loss. That's the impact of climate change, and guaranteeing the attainment of our SDGs. The Gambia is actively doing its best in mobilizing resources to turn our climate commitments into actions. However, to effectively deliver on the ambitious goals laid in our NDCs, we urgently need $268 million in conditional support. This funding is essential right now to implement the adaptation and mitigation efforts that will protect our communities and secure a prosperous future for generations to come. As we are wrapping with COP29 and looking forward to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in June 25, we seek the active support of the international community to expedite the key decisions on the international financial architecture reform agenda. It is important to emphasize that mere pledges of financing support are insufficient. We need the climate funds to be harmonized and streamlined to ensure vulnerable countries can maximize access to climate finance to address the growing adaptation financial gap. As vulnerable nations, we stand united in solidarity, committed to supporting each other in building a sustainable and prosperous future. For the Gambia, this means we urgently need a doubling of concessionary financing and resources to drive the structural transformations necessary for our economy. Only with this enhanced support we can foster resilience, sustainable growth, and equitable progress for our planet. and the people. We call on all developed nations, multilateral institutions, and private sectors to step up their financial commitments, streamline access to finance, and explore innovative financial solutions. Let us move from promises to practice, ensure that no country is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mr. José Alejandro Lorca, Minister of Popular Power for Eco-Socialism of Venezuela. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguido.
Distinguished delegates, distinguished representatives of the various international organizations here and everyone else listening here. I bring to you the cordial and kindred greetings of the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros. It's an honor for me to be here in this beautiful and vibrant town of Baku and to be involved in this emblematic climate conference summit. I would like to express my most heartfelt thanks to the government of Azerbaijan for the warm hospitality we have received and for having volunteered to host this COP, the significant COP. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we face the greatest climate crisis of our era, and despite the fact that we know that we have the enormous responsibility as a generation to slow it down, the efforts we have made have not been enough. The natural disasters have increased. Sea levels continue to rise, temperatures and acidity of oceans continue to rise at an alarming rate, and however we cannot admit defeat. We must speed up what we do to preserve life. In the words of our President, and I quote, "Humanity must unite in a common effort to save the planet. There is no plan B because there is no planet B," which is why we need political will of all countries. We need to work together to implement the Convention and the Paris Agreement without rewriting it, nor them or reinterpreting them. We must base ourselves on the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and respected capabilities, especially focusing on implementation. Madam President, it is crucial that we resolutely move towards a new an NCQG with the support of developed countries, with predictable financing, as well as transfer of technology and capacity building, which need to be sufficient, gradual and accessible. This is crucial if we want to achieve adaptation, mitigation and avoid loss and damage. Furthermore, we must end unlawful and criminal unilateral coercive measures, UCMs. My country is being subjected to them now, today, and these have been imposed upon us by the United States of America and the EU. These measures violate international and environmental law and restrict the right of our people to sustainable development. Despite these challenges, Venezuela has achieved significant progress in combating the climate crisis, and we are more committed than ever today. And today we're submitting our first national communication, our third national communication, our first biannual transparency report, and our first GHG inventory, which show the world that we are a carbon neutral country, and we only emit 0.39% of global emissions, and that we remove more emissions than we emit, given how diverse we are. At the same time, we're aware of the importance of continuous work, and we're aware of our contribution for the work. And then to do that, we implement policies for the welfare of future and present generations, including the fact that we protect more than 53% of our national territory, the fact that we have more than 50,000 young people involved in something we called the National Climate Empowerment Plan. We have 3,641 technical teams for recycling and sanitation, which strengthens our circular economy. 80% of our energy mix is renewable, and we have delivered to date over 5 million homes to our people as an adaptation measure. We are a developing country which has responsibly and tirelessly worked to combat climate change, which is why this COP, called the financing COP on financing, is called upon to, developed countries are called upon to walk their talk. I would like to conclude by reiterating the unshakable commitment to Mother Earth and the future generations. We in Venezuela will continue to fight for a world that is fairer, more sustainable, and in harmony with nature. If we unite, we will conquer, and we will do so for the welfare of our planet and only of all of humanity. We will only succeed if we are united.
Muchas gracias, Su Excelencia.
Thank you very much, Excellency.
It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Mrs. Amna bint Abdullah Al-Dahak Al-Shamsi, Minister of Climate Change and Environment of the United Arab Emirates. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
أصحاب المعالي، الوفود الكرام، السيدات والسادة، تحية لكم.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet you from the UAE, the host of the previous COP, COP29. We were very proud to hand over the presidency of COP to Azerbaijan, where we have been so very welcomed and hosted in order to speed up climate action, which is quite fruitful and impactful. In the UAE, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the head of the UAE, has declared 2024 a sustainable year successively after last year's sustainable year. And we have pledged that COP would be the most comprehensive COP. And indeed, we had the first GST taking place in COP in order to evaluate the goals of the Paris Agreement. The historic UAE consensus reflects consensus of the international efforts to combat and address climate challenges. That consensus was signed upon by 198 countries, and they have agreed on a road plan for just transition in the climate field. We have also pledged more than $850 million to the Fund for Loss and Damages. 18 pledges and $85 million were also pledged to finance climate action. We are still building on the successes of COP28 through various strategic steps that create opportunities for technology, creativity, and partnerships. In this year, the UAE has adopted the Mohammed bin Zayed Water Initiative, following COP28 pledges to provide $150 million to accelerate creative solutions for water scarcity. We look forward to co-hosting the UN Water Conference in 2026 in cooperation with Senegal in order to accelerate the implementation of Objective Goal 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we call upon you to actively participate in the pre-preparation phase for that conference. We have also committed ourselves to the troika of the presidents of COP28, 29, and 30 in cooperation with Azerbaijan and Brazil to accelerate global transition and to stress and underline climate action. Towards the beginning of this year, we succeeded to cooperate with the UNE and Panama to announce the World Renewable Energy Day as part of our strategy for carbon neutrality by 2050. We have pledged to double our efforts or to triple our efforts towards renewable energy by 2030. And our strategy for 2050 aims at availing $55 million by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, technology is the main buttress for acceleration of climate action, and the UAE has achieved an excellent technological achievement in 2024 by using green hydrogen to produce iron and steel. The Abu Dhabi renewable energy company Masdar and the Emirat Iron Company have announced the success of their pilot project in this respect. And as part of our 2050 hydrogen strategy, aims at making UAE a main producer of low-emission hydrogen by 2031. International cooperation has a deep impact to achieve our common goals when it comes to international climate action. And we aim at implementing the new quantitative goal in order to avail accessible and affordable climate financing to the global south and to implement Article 6 of Paris Agreement. We commit to the various aims of this COP: mitigation, adaptation, losses, just transition, water, technology, involvement of women and the youth. Climate action is indeed an opportunity, and we are sure that the presidency of COP29 would lead to a more sustainable future for us and for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Carlos James, Minister of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Sustainable Development and Culture of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, recognizing our ecological fragility as a small island developing state, St. Vincent and the Grenadines cannot afford to be a mere spectator on the important issue of climate change. It is against this backdrop that I stand here with the available science and our very own real-life experiences of being on the front line of the devastating impacts of climate change. For St. Vincent and the Grenadines, reducing carbon emissions to 1.5 degrees Celsius is more than just a target. Mr. President, on the 1st of July 2024, our multi-island state was ravaged by the passage of the Category 4 Hurricane Beryl, leaving some of our islands unrecognizable, with thousands of families homeless in the wake of its destruction. We thank those who supported and continue to support our recovery efforts. As I deliver this statement, my people are waking up to the ravaging effects of severe flooding that is currently affecting our island's infrastructure. If we are to follow the science, the aggressive nature and the unpredictability of present weather systems is the climate's response to humanity's failure to act. For SIDS, we simply do not have any more time for a polite ask. We cannot continue to expend finite resources on a continuous recovery cycle while chasing vague promises for minuscule and indifferent action. Mr. President, as our nation actively undertakes recovery efforts, COP29 is flagged as the finance COP, and this has an even greater personal and national significance to us. Amidst the colorful diplomatic language of some leaders on this platform, our climate negotiators are disgracefully being held in a metaphoric chokehold as a major historic and contemporary carbon emitters bob and weave their way out of the commitments to reduce carbon emissions and bail out on climate finance pledges. This is a selfish and unwarranted assault on the 65 million people living in SIDS. We need to ensure that at this COP, the new collective quantified goal will build upon previous climate finance targets. Mr. President, the new goal must take into account and respond to the urgent needs and priorities of developing countries and recognition of the special circumstances of SIDS, addressing efficaciously their unique social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities. Collectively, we must find solutions to unlocking the ever-complicated maze of climate finance, with practical considerations for access and distribution, while renewing the call for a restructure of the global financial architecture presently designed to keep SIDS in a vicious cycle of debt. Our government firmly advocates for effective multilateralism and an international framework within which our developed priorities can be pursued. In this vein, we highlight that all countries, especially those most affected, such as Taiwan, should have a seat at the negotiating table. Mr. President, we need an unprecedented level of collective action. In the final days of this conference, we must not compromise ourselves out of a viable future. Ambitious actions is not a want, but an imperative as we keep our heads above the rising tide to safeguard lives and livelihoods. Finally, Mr. President, there is still some lingering hope in humanity's call to action. Despite the challenges, it can and must be done. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kirti Vardhan Singh, Minister of State for Environment, Forests and Climate Change of India. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the government of Azerbaijan and the people of Azerbaijan for hosting us in this historical and beautiful city of Baku. Excellencies, today we are at a very important juncture of our collective fight against climate change. What we decide here will enable all of us, particularly those in the global south, to not only take ambitious mitigation actions, but also adapt to the climate change. Excellencies, our decisions on this forum should be guided by the core principles of equity, climate justice, and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities as provided in the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. The context of different national circumstances, sustainable development goals, and poverty eradication, particularly in respect of the global south, should not be lost sight of. The high carbon emission development pathways of the global north in the past have left very little carbon space for the global south. However, our growth trajectories for fulfilling the primary needs of sustainable development and poverty eradication cannot be compromised. Despite not contributing to the problem, we in the global south are bearing huge financial burden on account of climate actions for mitigation on one hand, and losses and damages caused by climate change on the other, thus severely limiting our capacity to meet our developmental needs. But Excellencies, these have not dampened India's resolve and commitment to take ambitious climate actions. We achieved our 2015 NDC targets on emission intensity reduction and non-fossil based installed electricity generation capacity much earlier than 2030 and have further enhanced our ambitions in these sectors. India's renewable energy capacity has nearly tripled from its 2014 levels, and we are on course to achieve the 500 gigawatt target by 2030. India has launched the Mission Life, which is Lifestyle for Environment, to encourage the sustainable lifestyle practices at the global level. Mission Life inspires individuals, communities, and societies to exercise choices and behaviors that focus on mindful utilization of resources. We are at the forefront of pro-planet actions. The campaign Ek Peड़ Maa Ke Naam, launched by Honorable Prime Minister on World Environment Day in June this year, has resulted in 1 billion saplings being planted since then. Plant for Mother, which urges everyone to plant a tree as a mark of love and respect for our Mother and Mother Earth, has resonated across the spectrum with its powerful, inspirational and emotional connect. Furthermore, International Solar Alliance, Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, Global Biofuel Alliance, Resource Efficiency and Circular Economy Industry Coalition, Leadership Group on Industry Transition have been launched by India with different partner countries in pursuit of global climate actions. Excellencies, raising of climate ambitions to align with Paris temperature goals has to be preceded by the free availability of green technologies, producing them on scale, and the availability of finance for their deployment, particularly in the Global South. On the contrary, some of the developed countries have resorted to unilateral measures, making climate actions more difficult for the Global South. The emergency situation we are in, there is no option but to break all barriers to flow of technology, finances, and capacity to the developing countries. The theme of this COP, enabling actions and enhanced ambition, is very relevant in this context. COP29 is the COP for climate finance. The new collective quantified goals on climate finance for mobilizing climate finance to meet the needs and the priorities of the developing countries. We all need to appreciate that huge costs are being imposed on a developing country like ours for undertaking our climate actions. What we decide here on NCQG must be founded on the principle of climate justice. The decisions must be ambitious and unambiguous, taking into consideration the evolving needs and the priorities of the developing countries and the commitment to sustainable development and eradication of poverty. Excellencies, the next round of nationally determined contributions are due for submission the next year. The breach of carbon space seems imminent towards the end of this critical decade. It is imperative, therefore, that the developed countries show leadership in mitigation actions as required under the Paris Agreement by not just advancing their net zero targets, but also providing enough carbon space for the developing countries like ours to develop. Excellencies, I urge that all of us should work with determination towards making COP29 meaningful and impactful in its outcomes. Excellencies, please be assured of India's full cooperation for a successful COP29. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Luai Karita, Minister of Local Administration and Environment of the Syrian Arab Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
السادة أصحاب المعالي ورؤساء الوفود.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen,
بمناسبة انعقاد مؤتمر الأطراف,
representatives of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Syrian Arab Republic, allow me to express my sincere congratulations to the government of Azerbaijan for organizing COP29. I would also like to thank the Secretariat of the UNFCCC for the warm welcome and the excellent organization. Syria reaffirms its commitment to global efforts to tackle climate change and to mitigate its impacts, while underscoring the need to set up the Loss and Damages Fund and to abide by obligations to developing countries to provide the necessary resources, taking into account the needs and priorities of developing countries, including Syria. Regarding Syria specifically, it is suffering the impacts of climate change on the economy and society too. These impacts take the form of decreased rainfall, increased dust storms, desertification and drought. On top of this, we have the impact of terrorist acts also affecting the environment in Syria, leading to a significant increase in atmospheric pollution, inter alia due to destruction of oil infrastructure and artisanal refining installations and petrol leaks in illegally occupied areas, illegally occupied by Western countries. These actions also lead to soil pollution, destruction of natural habitats, and the loss of many aquatic and land species, and forest fires. The Turkish occupation also continues to impact drinking water, including in the Euphrates, negatively impacting agriculture and biodiversity. There is also the aggravation of the situation regarding waste. In addition, we have economic sanctions, UCMs, imposed on the Syrian people, exacerbating the impacts of climate change and the delivery of much-needed materials and access to the necessary funds to tackle climate change. We, therefore, are not able to import necessary equipment, and we cannot access financing through international transactions. In spite of all of this and the impact of terrorism, the occupation, and UCMs imposed on our country, Syria has continued its efforts to protect the environment, including the environmental dimension in its development and recovery plans. Syria also continues to abide by international agreements that it is party to. For instance, we have updated our NDC as part of our National Climate Change Program. We have also set up a fund to mitigate the impacts of drought and natural disasters. By way of conclusion, I would like to thank everyone who participated in the preparations for this very important conference. We thank the government of Azerbaijan and also those in the UNFCCC Secretariat who contributed. I would like to reiterate the importance for developed countries and banking institutions and all of those providing technical and other assistance to abide by their technical and financial commitments to protect human life against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Beatrice Anwar, Minister of State for Environment of Uganda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A statement by His Excellency General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to congratulate His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, and the Co-President, His Excellency Mutka Babayo, for his excellent leadership in this COP29. Uganda supports the COP29 President's stand of leaving no one behind. With regard to climate ambition and climate action, Uganda affirms her support to the COP29 President's vision, fixed priority, dual pillar plan that is based on enhancing ambition and enabling action. In line with the first pillar of enhancing ambition, Uganda, despite being a relatively low contributor to the global greenhouse gas emissions, commits to updating her national determined contribution in 2025. In line with the second pillar, Uganda, like many developing countries, relies on the support from developed countries to implement a substantial proportion of her climate action commitments. It is against this background that Uganda calls for a further commitment of financial, technical, and capacity building support while ensuring simplified and direct access to those funds by the vulnerable countries that often have limited capacity to follow complex access modalities. Recognizing that climate finance is a key enabler of climate action, especially in developing countries, Uganda looks up to COP29, setting a new collective quantified goal on climate finance that takes into consideration the unique circumstances of the least developing countries and small island developing states in dealing with disproportionate impacts, loss and damage that these countries have to continually suffer in the face of climate variability and climate change. Uganda is optimistic that COP29 will expedite the approval of the operational modalities for the Fund of Addressing Loss and Damage due to the climate impacts to enable vulnerable communities to access these much needed funds as soon as possible. In conclusion, I would like to inform you that Uganda wishes to draw the attention of the COP29 to the growing problem of climate-induced migration in Africa. The number of affected people, particularly women and children, who are displaced within and across national borders is consistently on the rise with devastating consequences. Uganda offers the Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change Africa, a regional framework for addressing this evolving concern. Uganda welcomes global partners and friends to join hands to advance the implementation of this framework for the benefit of the people affected by climate-induced migration. I want to thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now it's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Dion Travers George, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment of South Africa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, climate change impacts are now visible globally, particularly affecting developing economy nations and deepening existing inequalities. For developing economies, COP29 presents a vital opportunity to establish institutional infrastructure supporting ambitious climate action, while addressing hurdles to sustainable development. These two objectives are inseparable. Climate change threatens to derail development progress, while failures to decarbonize risks economic marginalization nationally and disaster globally. Achieving these goals requires resources beyond our domestic capabilities. The new collective quantified goal, NCQG, on climate finance must deliver trillions of dollars annually. This support must avoid deepening the fiscal burdens on developing economy nations, particularly those struggling with debt, and should be accompanied by reforms to the global financial system, including multilateral development banks. In South Africa's context, adaptation remains our primary climate response priority. We support the UAE framework for global climate resilience and call for progress on adaptation indicators at COP29. Regarding mitigation, South Africa's NDC target represents an ambitious contribution considering our circumstances. We are implementing policies to achieve our 2025 and 2030 targets while addressing poverty, inequality and unemployment. We will submit our first biennial transparency report this year, reporting on our NDCs, and are developing our second NDC with consideration of the first global stocktake outcome. South Africa needs financial and non-financial support to ensure an inclusive and equitable transition that benefits all sectors, including SMMEs. We support the inclusive transition approach agreed to at COP28, recognizing that just transition encompasses both mitigation and adaptation and require substantial international cooperation. The just transition also depends on developing economy countries, on our ability to access international markets. Unilateral trade measures which aim to achieve unbalanced climate objectives outside of the framework of the multilateral process or unfairly restrict global trade in green technology will only serve to hinder our ability to achieve a just transition and slow the global effort to address climate change. We urge developed economy countries to fulfill their commitments, including the $100 billion per annum climate finance target through 2025, to rebuild trust as we work on the post-2025 NCQG. Let COP29 mark the turning point for redefining the global financial architecture to make it fit for purpose, for climate change and for sustainable development, and ensuring international financial institutions address the reality of achieving sustainable development, creating an equitable and resilient future for all nations. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. A continuación, tengo el placer de dar...
It's a pleasure now to give the floor to Susana Mohamed Gonzalez, Her Excellency, Minister of the Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. Excellency, you have the floor.
We come to speak about finance in this climate COP. However, the deep discussion is about inequality. The climate transition is following the same market-based solutions and is increasing and reproducing dangerously the gap between the richest and the most vulnerable. The transition cannot follow the same rules created to develop the fossil fuel-based economy. We need to create a transition regime. As an example, Colombia's challenge is about replacing the income of its export of coal, oil and gas, which represents today 10% of GDP, but also a big portion of the fiscal income of the country. It is not about only the energy transition, it's a whole economic transition, and we haven't debated the economic consequences of moving out of the fossil fuel economy as a whole. At the same time, the country faces fiscal restraints due to the indebtedness that happened after COVID, and also low-risk investment and increased debt costs with access to capital at 10%. How are we going to make this whole of economy transition at the same time that we are today dealing with the effects of the climate crisis, and we have to invest in the adaptation? How does the sum and the account add up with the current financial institutions where we have low investment access, high risk, and also high cost of capital, and at the same time high debt? We cannot take more debt. Are we going to continue saying in these COPs that we're going to comply with the Paris Agreement, having the same financial architecture and the same financial conditions? If we're going to say so, we're not going to comply, and that's what exactly the IPCC is showing in its gap report. So what we expect from this COP is to make a first step. On the one hand, to comply with the Paris Agreement NCQG goal that provides a financial package from developed to developing countries that is substantial, that can be a leverage to mobilize resources at a higher scale. On a second scale, that from this COP, debt relief could be attained and called politically upon. And finally, that we can call on a financial pact for life that guarantees long-term, direct access of finance for the transition. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, on behalf of the conference, I would like to thank you all for your statements. Distinguished delegates, we will continue with the delivery of a national statement tomorrow at 10 a.m. in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned.